All right. Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to our Three Rangers Foundation Transition Tuesday, our first webinar of January 2025. And David White, we are so happy to have you on. Our paths cross intermittently across the decades, but I'm super happy that you chose to be with us tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. I'm excited to be here and appreciate you having me on.
Well, David, one, you're a champion for the Ranger for Life program and the idea that we're going to use you up, but we'll take care of you on the way out. And you've always been an advocate. So it only makes sense to have you on, one, because of that, and two, your journey in a very short time. We're both December 2020 retirees. For the Rangers, can you just walk back, starting where you're at right now, all the things that you've done, whether they be their jobs, significant nonprofit work, book writing, school, to when you made the decision to transition, just so our folks can hear the processes that you've gone through?
Yeah, it has been quite a ride so far, and it's only been 4 years, I guess almost five. But yeah, so currently I'm the director of workforce and policy for an organization called the Greater Sandusky Partnership. It's essentially a 5-county kind of regional conglomerate in north central Ohio, and I've been doing this for about close to 3 years, although I took a little stint. So this is part of my journey. I took a little hiatus and worked for Mike Rogers. He has a tech startup that's actually I don't even know if I call it a startup anymore. It's scaling really quickly, called Critical Response Group. But he's a 175 FSO that started a really great business with Ethan Killeen that essentially does DRGs for the public sector. So I took a little stint. I realized sales wasn't necessarily for me, and so I went back into doing what I love. And then prior to that, I took a little stint in healthcare, working at the VA healthcare administration, and then in insurance, which I quickly found out was not for me. And then I kind of had a parallel education path. So I'm currently getting my PhD right now at Case Western in management theory, and I got my MBA at Ohio State. As much as I hate to admit that, and I retired in December of 2020, like you said. My last job was working in RSTB. I was the C for the reconnaissance company, and then spent a little bit of time in the op shop for RSTB. And I think I decided to retire probably maybe 8 months prior to actually retiring. I went through like the med board process because I got hurt in 2018.
All right. So to recap, 3 to 4 or 5 paid jobs, 1 degree complete, 1 advanced degree complete, another one you're working on, still married through all this, by the way. So there's a lot of communication going on. And right. I believe was there a CSP as part of your initial, were you able to do a transition fellowship as well?
I did, yeah. So I forgot to mention that. Yeah, so I did. I was a fellow at the SOTF, at Special Operators Transition Foundation, which was a great experience. But I initially did not choose to go to SOTF. I kind of went. I decided later, which I would not do in the future. So like, if I had to go back and do it again, I think I went through the Special Operators Transition Foundation with like a month left in the Army, so it didn't give me a very long runway to learn really the landscape of kind of this new world that I was about to enter.
Well, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to start there. I want to go now that we know that you've done a lot, you're here. I mean, that you are for really our senior Rangers and the retirees, right? We like to say that, I look at transition as a baseball game. one, because I love baseball, I can make anything a baseball analogy. And we want to, in transition, to hit a leadoff home run. It's also good to get on base. It's good to know something about the pitcher, right? Like you can have a, don't really not too many productive outs when you're the leadoff hitter, but we want to hit leadoff grand slams, which is impossible. So take me back to David White once you and your family made the retirement decision. And let's go through what you think you did right and what you would do different. You've already mentioned one.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the first thing that I would say I did right, and as hard as it was for me at the time, was making the decision to hang up the hat. I mean, I think like when guys know, they know. And for me, like, uh, I was struggling with, my injury. I couldn't keep up with the boys anymore. I was just really struggling. And and so I think the first thing is like I realized it was my time to get out. Like I had a great career, I enjoyed every second of it, and I was proud of what like we did as an organization. But it was time for me to get out, and I think like I would say number one, that was something I did right, even though it was probably still one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. Um, and and I think two is uh, you know I had told my wife that we would move wherever she wanted to move when I got out. And so that that guided a lot of decisions. Quite frankly, it also uh, limited a lot of opportunities because we were moving to Huron, Ohio. And so I know where Huron, Ohio is but for the masses, it's like this really small little town in between Cleveland and Toledo in northern Ohio. And so uh, there's not as many opportunities as there are in like let's say a big urban area like New York City or Atlanta or Houston, etc. But that was the right decision for me and my family at the time, and we still live here. And I figured it out. I figured out how to be successful regardless of kind of location. And so I think prioritizing that was important. And so I think that would be a sustain. And then and what I would say, like again, if I had to do it over again, is I would start thinking about transition much earlier, because even though I decided probably 8 months before I got out that I was going to get out, my focus was purely on kind of the med board process, and I didn't even really think about like, well, what do I want to do next until like probably a month before I got out, and like that was too late, um, and I was scrambling, um, and I think like that matters because I was more at that point then in like fight or flight mode. Like, how do I figure out how to like keep a roof over my family's head and uh, et cetera. So I was making decisions based on that vice, based on like what did I want to be and what did I want like my life to look like when I was 80.
And so you did mention then that you used an organization to assist, Special Operations Transition Foundation. So a lesson learned would be kind of build your transition team a little bit earlier. I remember we've talked before up at the Rockport Wealth Advisors golf tournament, and you kind of talked a little bit about um, rushing in, and it kind of because of your compressed timeline. So
Yeah.
how, in that compressed timeline, how did that decision making calculus come down to, well, I've got the location, so now I've got to have a set income, and the first one to offer gets the services?
Yeah, kind of. And I was also following the formula that kind of SOTIF had, which was, uh, you know, great organization. Their relationships mostly are in urban areas, and so I commuted to Cleveland, which is probably an hour drive. Isn't undoable, but I mean it's still like that's 2 hours out of your day. Um, and in an industry where they had relationships in, which just so happened to be insurance. It wasn't necessarily in a field that I could see myself being for, the long term. It was kind of like, here's the relationships that we have, and this will kind of pay you the requisite amount that you are looking for. And so I was like, okay, well, great. It's good to be wanted, right? And I think like for a lot of us, um, it feels great to like for an employer to say like we want you on our team, um, even if it's maybe not the right fit, both industry or employer. And so I think I jumped in kind of like, oh, you know this is the opportunity. If I don't take it, then there's not going to be another one, or who knows when the next one's going to come. So
Well, you also made the decision to go to the Ohio State University. For those listening, Dave is what we call a turncoat trader, living in Ohio, but family, lifelong Michigan fans, and anybody who knows me knows that I was blessed to be in the greatest state of the union, born in the greatest state of the union. So, with that though, when did you decide executive versus full time? I probably income family related a little bit. Have to work. When did you decide to do that? When did you pull the trigger? Are you happy? Was the juice worth the squeeze? And now looking back at it.
yeah, I think so. I'm quite frankly, like, I don't think I ever looked at the full-time MBA. I think I was looking at executive MBAs, because that was a model I was familiar with. A good friend of mine, Ray Perez, who I know you know well, Tony, went through the Emory's program, and that was kind of just starting to take off. Like he was, I'm not even sure if he graduated at that point, but I think he might have been going through. So I was familiar with that model. I've had a couple of other friends do the executive MBA route. Um, and I actually applied to Emory and Michigan first. I didn't even apply to Ohio State, and I got into both, and I decided to go to Michigan. And in fact, they thought I was joking when I called them and said, "Actually, I'm going to Ohio State." But through Three Rangers and through the network, and I think that's the power of community. I think this is the power of what um, is being built, because I didn't call Ohio State. Ohio State called me, and that was purely because of the Three Rangers network, uh, and who knew Dan Ogilvy, who was leading the program at the time, and he called me and he's like, "Hey, I'm Dan Ogilvy. Here's who I am. Do you have a minute to talk?" And I was like, "Actually, no, I don't," because I was doing something at the time. And long story short, the next day I interviewed. He was like, "By the way, you can start the program almost a year earlier, if you go to Ohio State." And I was like, "Okay, timing is matters." And so I started like a month after that. And I have no regrets, because I think what the executive MBA does is it gives it's an incredibly powerful networking tool. Like I really, and I'm glad I actually went to Ohio State for the network, because my cohort of like um, 30, 35 professionals, and I learned just as much from them as I did the curriculum, uh, that are entrenched in the business community throughout the state. So it was really valuable.
But Dave, so that first job, what is going through your? I'm sure you're performing well. But you'd mentioned before in our little prep session this idea of self-actualization, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yep.
is, I don't know if I could spell it in Scrabble. I could come close. I could come dangerously close. Um, what was that like in the White household, right?
Yeah.
As you are supporting the family, you got this MBA thing going. So how are we looking for a job? Right. I'll often ask Rangers though to be fair, right? You didn't fail, right? You found something that didn't work for you that led you to something else.
Yeah.
Um, but what is that like when it's like I made a decision with my career and it's not maybe what I thought it would be, or maybe it just confirmed that you rushed into it? What was that
Yeah.
like for? Because we don't like to talk about our emotions, right? We like to say, okay, you know, after action report everything and learn from it. But what did that feel like? That I would think that'd be extremely difficult.
Yeah, it it was, but I did this through in school. So I was going to which I think is an advantage of an executive MBA, or any executive education for that matter, is that like you can go to school and you can work at the same time. And by the way, you can apply what you're learning directly in your day to day kind of professional life. Um, but we did this exercise with with one of the professors named Brian Bowers, super awesome guy, and super successful guy. So I think he was like the senior VP of Kansas Southern Railways, and he had us do this exercise, and essentially it was like writing your legacy. And so he was like, start when you're 80 years old, and like, what do you want to remember? What do you want? How do you want people to remember you? And then like really like put a lot of thought into that. What are your values? What, et cetera, et cetera. And then like plan backwards from that. And so I did that, and I actually dove all in. It wasn't like one of those assignments where I kind of like, did the numbers and like turned it in. I dove all in, and I realized like, all right, if I, here's what I care about. I don't need to have $100 million in my bank account, but what I do want is I want my kids to live a comfortable life, and I want to be able to provide for them. I also want them to want to be around me, and like when I'm an adult, like I want to have a deep relationship with my kids while I'm an adult and they're adults. And so, like, obviously, there's stuff I need to do now in order to make that happen. And I also want to have an impact on people. Like I want people to remember Dave White as he had a positive impact on his community and the people around him. And so I kind of like started there and was like, all right, well, if that's what's important to me, like what do I need to do? And I realized like, all right, selling insurance isn't that. And so it was really like it was a fairly easy decision for me to move on. Um, I would say my wife has a ton of faith in me and is super supportive, and has always been. And so that was easier. But I knew like if that's what matters, like I'm not on the path towards that right now. And so how do I self correct? And so like in my next year, I was like, okay, well maybe healthcare administration is that for me. And I quickly realized there that like that's not it either. And and so like I didn't wait long. I think I was a fellow in an internship program for healthcare and I think I stopped 2 week or no, maybe 2 months into the program. I was like, nope, this isn't it. But I also think like part of that is I had the confidence in myself that like I'm gonna go like I'm gonna go find something, and I know I have the skill set to add value. And so like I just got to find where the value that I add to a company aligns with what I get out of like what the value that I get out of working there.
Well, what I is it also fair to say, right? Because I don't want to assume away the answers to your life. The job market, right, and work. It looks a lot. Can you kind of explain how it looks a lot different once you're in it and you're around civilians and you have these networks versus when you're in Fort Moore, Georgia, or Hunter Army Airfield, or JBLM, worrying about what you're going to do next? Because I think once you hit
Yeah.
that location, now all of a sudden these other things become available just because you're there.
Yeah, no, for sure. I don't, there isn't a job that I got that wasn't because of who I knew or who somebody that I knew. Like it was a network effect. Um, and so that, like to your point, Tony, I think networking is extremely important. Um, and I think, the more that we can leverage our kind of the ranger community, um, that's important too, because guess what? Like Dave White now has a network in Ohio that if somebody wants to move to Ohio, like I can help them. Uh, like let's design what your life looks like, and let's put a team around that for you, and let's help you be successful. And I think that's the power of the Ranger Alumni Network and what we can do kind of together, but also like who you knows matters, and building those relationships is probably one of the single more most important things you can do in order to like give yourself options, give yourself the option to say this isn't for me, I'm going to pivot to somewhere else because like I know people in that field that can help me be successful.
Let's talk about then the work and the sweet spot. It seems like you're doing it right now, right? Because this is the longest time you spent at a job post
Yeah.
military, right? So let's talk about what you do again and like how it brings you set personal and professional satisfaction.
Yeah. So right now in my role, essentially like I am building talent pipelines for our region. And so, like, that includes kind of an intergenerational uh, talent development kind of pipeline that starts in high school and goes through C suite. That includes, how are we executing strategies that are going to keep our talent like within our region or like go out and bring talent back to our region for the labor force. There's kind of like in economics and I feel like a economist a lot, like almost and much of my day is consumed with that, um, and uh, then helping folks overcome barriers to employment. So that includes like how are we providing kind of the foundational housing needs and childcare and transportation, et cetera. And what I would say is, one, I'm super passionate about it. I love it, as you could probably tell by me. But two, like what I found is that like I can find something I'm passionate about and that gives me purpose outside of Ranger Regiment. And um and by the way, I like I feel like now that I've found that purpose, um like I love my job. I love my life. Like I was actually like looking at that your last question. Um, that I don't mean to like jump ahead, but talk about the day to day grind of civilian life, and I don't feel like I'm living in a grind only because I love what I do, and because I love what I do, like I wake up invigorated with purpose, etc. Just like I did when I was in regiment, and that's not to say like there's not hard days. There's hard days in regiment, but like the hope that I have for guys is that they'll get out, they'll figure out like what gives them purpose, they'll find it, and um, and they'll be able to design a joyful life that is meaningful for them because they've found something that, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be work, right? I mean, it could be purpose in being a stay-at-home dad. It could be, it doesn't matter as long as you find what that is for you.
I love it. I love it. I love the fact that you're happy. Like that's what brings, and what I do for work, that's what brings me joy.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
Because I know that
Yeah.
someone like yourself, joy brings perspective.
Yep.
And it is
Yep.
not innate to most folks. And I don't think it's not necessarily innate for ourselves because of our version of loyalty can actually be distorted
Right.
to non-human beings.
Hmm.
Right? This thing that's regiment. Well, that regiment thing's people, right? But
Right.
sometimes it takes us a while to get there. So now we're happy where we're at, right? But we're still continuing education with a PhD. Does this transition thing ever stop? I mean, is it? I don't want to, we don't know what's next, but are you able to stop and smell the roses now? Or how would you, as you're now in the stable stage, right, steady stable stage of operations here, how do you look and think about what's next? I'm sure it involves your wife, of course, But how does that
Right.
look?
Yeah, I think that one, to answer your first question, I mean, I think life is a journey, and journeys are laced with transition. And so I don't know if I would ever even bookend military transition. Like I think that's a lifelong thing, and um, I think there's different stages of transition, and so I would say like I'm probably at a different stage of my transition than I was 3 years ago. But I think it's a continuous thing because life's kind of a continuous journey. Uh, and I would say I don't know necessarily what's next. I love what I do. I would love to scale what I do. I have a couple of ideas, and one of the reasons I'm pursuing my PhD is because like I want to learn the research component. Like, how do we like can I if I'm going to create something, how do I have kind of the wasta behind like saying it's evidence based? Um, but uh, but what I will say is this: like, I'm excited for what's next. I don't exactly know what it's going to be, but I'm excited for it. And I think that there was this moment, and I can't tell you exactly when the moment was, Tony, but like when I realized like, oh, I can actually like do this civilian thing, um, and I like can be successful, and like it was like that, and the light switch flipped, and it gave me a complete different perspective on kind of what post-military life looks like for me, my excitement for like the future, etc. uh and so like my hope would be like, how do we help guys find that switch for them, whatever it is, uh, because it's like palpable. And so, it's like I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly what's next, but what I will say is like it's going to be good, and I'm going to be happy, and and so like yeah, I think that's enough.
Well, Dave, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. For the listeners, Dave didn't also mention that he's a published author as well. So during all of these things, he's actually documented his transition journey and lessons learned as well. David is a mentor through Ranger Foundation, so there's a very good chance that someone headed off to Central to Northeast Ohio or looking at different MBA routes, or even civic service, might have Dave as a mentor. So, David, once again, we thank you for your time and continuing to serve, because like transition never ends. It's really service that never
Right.
ends. All
Yeah.
right, brother.
Well, thanks, Tony. I appreciate it.
Take care and have a great evening. Thanks again. Rangers lead the way.